his chief negotiator, Steve Witkoff, is a property tycoon and a golfing partner of Trump. He seems to have been given the entire world, all the world's problems to solve. He's trying to deal with Iran, with Gaza, as well as Ukraine. Marco Rubio is a very inexperienced, although very sensible Secretary of State. The Defense Secretary is an amateur. So this is not a strong team. And I don't get the impression that there are many State Department professionals working with them. And so they are tending to go, they're living hour by hour. They're living breaking news flash by another. I don't see any real settled strategy here. And so, yes, it's a competition from each side to gain their attention and to convince them, in the short term that they're more positive. They offer America more. That's why that minerals deal that Zelensky signed, I think, was important. But it's frankly not a professional team, and therefore the British and French in supporting Zelensky have to keep trying to keep things on track, and also I think keep the White House on track and to see what is really important here.
And at this moment, of course, we still don't know exactly what will or will not happen in Istanbul, nor the consequences. And this is a process which started, as I said earlier, on the 11th of March. 40 years in diplomacy yourself. Does this compare remotely to anything you've ever experienced in your career?
No, I think this is a roller coaster ride of a kind I can't remember. I mean, we've had shuttle diplomacy before. We've had Henry Kissinger shuttling around the Middle East, or Richard Holbrooke around the Balkans before the Dayton Conference. But there was always a stronger American grip on the process and an American willingness to focus their economic and their military muscle in order to get things over the line. It's much more chaotic and random at this point, and therefore I think it's been less successful. And without a really successful professional American negotiating team at the heart, things keep going wrong. So we're in uncharted territories, certainly from my experience.
I'm really interested to get your professional view. I mean, over and over again, we see instances of Putin's sleight of hand, his ability to diplomatically outmaneuver his adversaries. How do you deal with that?
Well, actually, I don't think he's been all that smart in the last few days. I mean, I would have agreed with you, and over the first couple of years of the war, his military situation was bad, but his diplomacy was quite deft. The way he's handled this call for people to show up in Istanbul for negotiations has been flat-footed, actually, because he put out the call, and then when it was answered yes by Zelensky, he couldn't answer yes in return. And so I think he has visibly irritated some on the American side by doing that. So I'm not sure he's quite as deft as people think. He's very, very set in his sort of dictatorial ways. I don't think he's listening to a lot of advice, and he's contemptuous of Zelensky and of Ukraine. And that's been rather exposed, I think, by the way Zelensky's been able to operate with advice from Starmer and Macron and others. So, I think the guy's got weaknesses, even in his manipulative, propagandistic kind of foreign policy.
It all looked so different at the weekend, didn't it, in Kyiv, with Zelensky, Britain, France, Germany, and Poland meeting, Donald Trump joining on the phone. They call for this immediate ceasefire. They threaten new sanctions if it didn't happen. Why didn't they follow through on Monday, late Monday, when there was no sign of Putin holding to a ceasefire and instead proposing this meeting?
Well, I think partly because they've been trying to stay in step with Donald Trump. And it was quite striking that Trump, at that point, basically told Zelensky in his social media post to get to Istanbul to the meeting, but he hasn't put similar pressure on Putin as well. So there's still a disproportionate approach here. I'm afraid Trump is still in the mindset of thinking that basically Zelensky is the guy in the weaker position, so he can be pushed around and ordered to do this and that. And Putin, there still seems to be a curious respect on Trump's side for Putin. He hasn't been sending the same kind of threatening social media messages. However, I hope that by now Trump is getting impatient with Putin, who has never delivered on any of the initiatives that Trump has taken. And I think part of the game on the Western side is to make absolutely sure that as this breaks down, as I think it will, the blame lies squarely at Putin's door, and therefore the prospect perhaps of of Trump accepting that it's time for more sanctions on the
So,
Russians.
so that meeting at the weekend, it was Europe's real big effort to design a framework for meaningful peace talks. It failed so far. What happens next, and how do you get them to put the pressure to unveil Putin for what he is in Trump's eyes?
I mean, I think it was the ceasefire proposal was more of a sort of political gambit to put the pressure on Putin, and in fact, it worked in the sense that Putin did not show up. I think the more important work going on at the weekend was in the background on what exactly the support package from the West would be for Ukraine, and that's part of the answer, actually, of finally moving this towards a day when the Russians will be willing to do some sort of deal, is to show that Ukraine is strong and that the risk that they'd be left abandoned by the Americans pulling out isn't going to happen. They were talking about more support from arms, some sort of air policing package, some sort of maritime support, and possibly some Western forces on the ground, although I'm less clear about what that would be in practice, all of which adds up to some quite significant security backing for Ukraine. And that's part of convincing Putin that he can't win this war.
Mm. When you take into account that talks of a ceasefire have been going on now, seriously, inverted commas, since the 11th of March, a lot of the analysis since has portrayed each side trying to frame the other as the obstacle to peace and curry favour with Trump. And you say you still have that hope that Trump may actually finally lose patience and see reason to put pressure on Putin. How close do you think that we are to that?
Heavens, I mean, nobody can read that guy's mind. He is very focused on getting deals, and he keeps hoping that there's going to be a quick deal, a quick ceasefire that he can take the credit for. And several times now he's proposed, let's move to a quick ceasefire. And each time Putin has showed he's not interested in a quick ceasefire for the reasons we've been talking about. So logically, he ought to conclude at some point that this guy Zelensky is up for it and Putin's not up for it, and that therefore Russia should be sanctioned. And there have been some signs, for example, from J.D. Vance talking at a European security conference in Washington before making the trip to Saudi Arabia, suggesting that the Americans are now beginning to run out of patience with Putin, that they do think he is asking for far too much and is not showing himself at all flexible. So yes, I don't rule out that Trump can flip and suddenly discover that Putin is the problem and sanctions him. He is so mercurial that that is not at all out of the question, I think.
And travelling on Air Force One today, Donald Trump told reporters that nothing is going to happen on Ukraine ceasefire talks until he and Putin get together. But so far, has anything good come out of it for Ukraine when they do?
No, not yet. I mean, the worst has been avoided. The worst would have been an American cut-off of economic support, military support, intelligence. That's been avoided, at least for now. I mean, it's a classic Trump remark that nothing happens unless I'm around. And maybe it's true that only Trump could get Putin to come somewhere for a discussion. But as I was saying earlier, the problem is that two sides are starting from completely different positions. And a bilateral meeting between Trump and Putin would be fraught with danger because then all his instincts would be to try and cut a deal with Putin. So if there is going to be a meeting involving Trump, it has to have Zelensky there as well to make sure that the other side of the argument is being put.
And do you think also that European leaders should be stepping up and putting more pressure on to have their voices heard?
Well, actually, I think they've been doing pretty well. I mean, I think that meeting last weekend was an example of how they met together in Norway, but they were talking to Donald Trump on the phone as well. I hope, therefore, they were coordinating what they were going to say publicly. And the whirlwind of international meetings goes on. There's a NATO foreign ministers meeting going on while we speak, where the Secretary of State Marco Rubio is attending. There's also a European political summit happening in Tirana in Albania. And so there's a blizzard of things going on. And I think the European side, Starmer and Macron particularly, have been pretty good at managing to keep Trump at least up to date with what's going on, avoiding surprises and avoiding the most unhelpful kind of social media reactions. But it's it's an hour by hour struggle, I think.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio. If you'd like to know more about the war in Ukraine, you can subscribe and sign up for a membership. You can also get more analysis by listening to Times Radio or read thetimes.com. But for now, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.